Hi, my name is Sarah, and today I'm going to do a deep dive into how I learned to kickflip. But before I get into it, first a disclaimer.
This has been my most requested video. It will be long, and I do not have perfect kickflips, but I have spent 30 plus sessions workshopping them and trying to learn how to kickflip correctly. I wanted to get down to the mechanics and really figure out how I could more quickly and more easily master this trick. And I've come much closer to that goal, so let's begin.
Before you even try to learn how to kickflip, I highly recommend learning how to level out your ollies. Now, in order to kickflip, you don't even have to know how to ollie. There are some skaters who learned how to kickflip first because that was their goal. You don't need a high ollie, but a leveled out ollie is pretty crucial to learning how to do a cleaner kickflip. And really the goal of this video is to help you get a more leveled out and clean kickflip right from the very beginning, so you can skip the stage or shorten the stage where your kickflip might look like this, where you kick straight down and isn't ideal. Now, it will take a lot of effort and time to learn to kickflip, but it is definitely possible. So let's start by oversimplifying the kickflip.
The kickflip is done by popping your tail, bringing your front foot up, and flicking your front foot forward and off the corner of the nose of your skateboard. Sounds simple, but it is terribly difficult. A little backstory.
The original method that I used to practice the kickflip turned out to be absolutely terrible. It was supposed to be another 30-day challenge where I tried a specific method for 30 days to see how close I could get to the kickflip, and it turned out to be way too aggressive. I ended up with an injured quad muscle and I couldn't even skate anymore. So there was a whole month gap between the first 15 sessions and the second 15 sessions that I'm mostly referencing in this video. And it took me an entire 2 months for that quad muscle to completely heal back up. But luckily, I still learned a lot and I have a much better method to recommend at the end of this video. So let's dive into the important stuff, like what affects the kickflip.
Foot positioning. The back foot. Keeping my back foot right in the middle of the tail worked best for me. I kept the ball of my foot around the center here, with my pinky toe close to the edge of the deck. But always remember, everyone has different feet and setups, so this might look a lot different for you. Some people like their foot a little closer to the toe side edge, but that didn't work well for me. I like the center of the tail for kickflips. The front foot. The most generic and general advice of keeping my front foot near the corner bolt of the front trucks did end up being the best spot for me to get a nice and more leveled out kickflip. I placed the flicking portion of my shoe right next to the lower toe side corner bolt. I tried placing my front foot back in the beginning. This allowed me to kick harder, and it was also more comfortable for me in general because I am shorter, so a smaller stance typically is better for me. But it was indeed much more likely to rocket in this position. I was more likely to flick in the rocket zone, which I will talk about in a few minutes. If you're looking for the fastest way to get a kickflip, just to say you landed one, this might be the best place to start out. Another thing that oddly helped me was exaggerating the angle of my front foot. A straighter front foot did not work for me at all. I got way too much friction and threw the board almost every time. But when I exaggerated this angle to 45 degrees or even more, it was a lot easier to flick the board in the right direction, which is this way. Bad pop.
Now, popping the kickflip is actually what I struggled with the most. So let me show you why.
I talk about bad pop angle a lot, and it was so difficult for me to pop straight down when doing the kickflip. I think I wanted to jump forward to put more strength into the flicking foot, but it just destroyed me each time. And I have countless clips of the bad pop angle ruining my kickflip before even trying to flick. As you can see here, angled pop pushed the board in that same direction.
And I think because in my mind, I want to jump forward to get that flicking motion with my front foot, I ended up doing something really strange with my back foot.
It does this bizarre circular kick, and that caused a ton of rotating kickflips. The board ended up doing a shove-it motion, and it was incredibly frustrating.
And I actually wasn't able to fix this until the last couple sessions of this experiment. I knew that I needed to pop straight down, and the best way to force my body to do this was actually to adjust my weight. Basically, I shifted my body weight more towards the tail so that I could pop straight down and jump straight up. And this infinitely improved my kickflip almost right away. Now, it's not something that I want to be doing forever, but for now, it is helping me get that straight pop.
The flick.
The flick was my second biggest issue while doing this experiment. For starters, I was flicking in the wrong direction for most of the experiment. I was flicking much too forward when I should have been flicking much more to the side of the nose. So let me break down how the direction that you flick in and where on the nose you flick in seems to affect the flip.
Where you flick and the direction is really important. So let's start with where not to flick. For starters, this is a big red zone. You do not want to be flicking here for a regular kickflip. This is the rocket kickflip and popsicle credit card zone. This is actually where most beginners seem to start their kickflips. Flicking here will rotate the board and you can get a faster flip, but it's difficult to level it out here. And you might get a popsicle, which happens when your foot misses or slightly hits the board and the board continues to pop straight up towards your groin or inner thigh. This orange zone is the yeet zone or the launch zone. When your toes drag from the bottom of the bolts towards this zone, you often end up with too much friction and that throws the board out in front of you, sometimes with zero chance of it flipping. This can also happen when you try to flick too much in front of you like an ollie and not enough to the side like a kickflip. Or when you don't get a good bend on your ankle, which I found to be really important because if my ankle did not bend enough, the rubber of my sole created way too much friction with the grip and threw the board out in front of me. So stretch and get a nice ankle bend. This is the green zone. This is the ideal place to be flicking. It's not easy to do, but this is the area I found to have the highest probability of giving me a nice, clean, and more leveled out kickflip. And direction is important. You want to be flicking like this, out, which is super weird, and I definitely thought that I needed to flick toward the nose to level it out, but flicking out and off to the side was what actually gave me the best leveled out kickflip. Now, having a nice leveled out ollie is important here because I try to visualize the kickflip and ollie together. The kickflip seems to be similar to an ollie in that you need to bring your front foot up from the bolts to the nose. You do need to push the nose forward, but there needs to be a flick in this direction. So learning to flick the kickflip very much became about combining my ollie skills with this new information of flicking my foot up and off the nose. This is why I practice this particular move by sliding my front foot up and off the edge of the nose. I want to flick in this direction, but I also want my front foot to go forward and up. I found that I struggled a lot with the follow through of the flick. My foot stayed too close to my body, but the more I flicked up and out, the better I became. So following through on that motion became really important. The one thing you do not want to do is flick down. So really working on the flick and holding your leg up is incredibly important.
I also found that my jump, or specifically my knee height, affected my kickflip's flick.
Now, you do not have to have a super high jump to get the kickflip. You can see that here. However, like I mentioned, the ideal flick comes off the nose. So when I don't bring my foot up high enough, it catches the bolts and throws the board forward or only flicks off the edge to give me a rocketed flip. So I did plenty of knee tuck jumps at the end to work on this. I really wanted my front foot coming up high enough so that it could flick off the nose and not off the bolts. And I wanted my back foot coming up high enough too to let the board rotate. So knee tuck jumps were also part of the program. Your shoulders. Open shoulders was not something that I particularly struggled with. If my shoulders were opened a degree or two, I actually found it a little bit easier to flick my front foot. But just remember that the more you open your shoulders, the more likely you are to jump in that direction and rotate while jumping. So open shoulders can actually increase the chances of getting a popsicle or a credit card because you're turning your body, you're more likely to miss the board when you flick, and you create a nice open space for the board to come up and hit you in the groin or inner thigh. And if you find that your board is rotating front side or that you are rotating front side and your board is staying where it is, checking and experimenting with your shoulders is always a good place to start looking for an issue. Body weight distribution.
And on the topic of jumping and shoulders, I mentioned that I had to move my body weight closer to the tail to get a solid pop. Now that might not be the case for everybody. Some people might need to have their weight more centered over the board. And that's why experimenting with what works for you is so important. But there are a few things that you can consider when setting up for the kickflip.
1. Where your weight should be. This is going to be more individual than other things. Having your weight centered for a trick between your feet is typically good advice, but in my case, I do need to lean back a little bit to help force myself to pop straight down. So pay attention to how you're leaning, where the board is flipping, etc. to try to see what might help you. 2. Jumping direction. The board rotates slightly behind me when I do the kickflip. So when I put my weight over my back foot, I also lean heel side very slightly. So when I jump, I end up with this tiny hop backwards right onto the board. It also helps me flick because I am traveling in the same direction as the flick.
This will probably be different for everybody, so record your session and really pay attention. Try to analyze how your body weight might be affecting your kickflip. And then experiment. So if you notice that you lean really far forward during the kickflip, try to focus on leaning more towards the center or even leaning back a little bit. See how that helps and then keep troubleshooting from there.
Mini summary.
So let's break this down a second time, but with all the tips together.
I set up with my back foot in the center of the tail and my front foot exaggeratedly angled right below the corner bolt. I lean slightly back over the tail and towards the heel side edge of my deck. I pop straight down and bring my front knee nice and high so that I can flick my front foot off the side of the nose while my front foot also continues to go forward so that the board is more likely to level out. And while I do that, I bring my back foot up to allow the board time to flip and then hopefully catch the bolts with my back foot and push the deck back down to the ground with both feet.
Sounds easy, right? Well, no, we all know that kickflips can be a nightmare, and they are a nightmare for many skaters. So let me remind you that for most skaters, learning how to kickflip is a long and painful process. It's hard and takes a long time for most people. And so my only goal with the following method is not some magical miracle, you will definitely learn how to kickflip. My goal is to provide you with exercises that will allow you to shorten that time between not being able to kickflip and being able to kickflip. Now you can think of this method as a progressive workshop, or you can pick and choose the tips that you think will help you work on the kickflip. Either way, here it is.
My first recommendation: find something to hold on to. I practiced with a broken mirror, but a ledge or a fence or anything you can use to hold yourself up a little extra will help. Holding something is great because it's safer, you can save yourself when you primo, it gives you a little extra time when coming down, and it allows you to save your focus for what you really need to pay attention to with your body. Step 1. Choose your foot positioning. Give your ankle a nice bend and drag your foot up and off the corner of the nose. Do this 5 to 10 times very quickly and extend your foot past the nose while going up and out. I aim to make the board vibrate. I found the foot extension and speed to be very important because when I go to do the real kickflip, I tended to keep my foot in too close and also slow down. So practicing in an exaggerated way helped me improve. You want to practice for the real thing. Step 2. Hold on to something and try to land 3 kickflips. Just 3. Really try to focus on a decent pop straight down and that flick out. If you can't land 3 in the beginning, that's fine. Start with one kickflip and add another one until you can do 3. Step 3. This is actually an optional step. The step is popping and flicking the board and then trying to land on it with just your front foot. Now this is a really popular step, but no one really explains how to do it or what to focus on. Basically, if you want to land with your front foot on the board, you just need to lean back a little bit too far. The board will jump in front of you and you can land with your back foot behind the tail. I don't find this particularly helpful for learning to land back on the deck, but as I did the experiment, I did find it helpful for getting my front foot to extend forward and try to flip the board. It helped me to work on speed and front foot extension. It also helped me to hold my leg up. So I used it to work on quickly flicking my front foot out and then holding it up just a little extra. And that was a great way for me to remind my muscles not to come back down right away. Step 4. Step 4 is adding an ollie or pop to caveman and a couple more flicks. At this point, you've already flipped the board 6 times, so do 1 or 2 ollies and flick the board a few more times. The kickflip is similar to an ollie where the front foot travels in a slightly different direction. So practicing the ollie here in the middle reminds your muscles of all the important parts of an ollie, like popping down, pushing the nose forward, and pulling your back foot up. Jumping. You really want to channel this energy. If you struggle with popping the board straight down, you can use the pop to caveman here instead, or do both. You basically want to fire up the correct muscle groups. And you want to do it with good form this time. No exaggerated leaning like in step 3. Step 5. Step 5 is to commit just one time. Committing is maybe the hardest part of the kickflip. It is a huge mental barrier, which is why it's at the end after you just spend at least 15 minutes or so building up in baby steps. You worked on all the individual parts of the kickflip up until this point. You isolated each little part. So now with the ollie motion and landing on the deck fresh in your mind, try a kickflip. It doesn't matter if the board falls upside down either. When I did the experiment, my goal was to only commit to landing one time, and it worked wonders. I didn't care if I landed on it upside down, and I didn't even care if the board was not underneath me. I just wanted to know that inside my mind, I had committed to trying to land on that board. And eventually, I was able to commit much faster and much easier. And now I can commit to the ugliest of attempts. The bonus step. The bonus step is my favorite knee tuck jump. If you're having trouble jumping or bringing your back or front foot up, knee tuck jumps are my go-to move. I hold my hands out and try to bring my knees up to touch my hands. This is often the last reminder my body needs to get a kickflip. When I realize I'm just not jumping well, a knee tuck jump really does help.
Anyway, once I could consistently commit and was getting pretty good at flipping the board, I shortened the steps. I alternated between flicking practice, an ollie, and a few kickflip attempts. When I was struggling with something in particular, like extending my foot forward, I brought back that particular step. And I started to get kickflips more and more often. So here's what a sample of this progressive workshop might look like, minus all the mistakes to save time. And I will be back with a part 2 for this video sometime, maybe with an update to the method and just anything else that I learn while working on improving my kickflip. So until then, I really hope you enjoyed this massively long video. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope to see you next time.